Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Focus on Parliament, where we dissect issues that have happened in Parliament. But Parliament is on recess, and we'll be back and we'll, join into the conversations thereof. But also critical to Parliament, this week we celebrated the Janan Luwum Day. This is the 8th year of us celebrating this point in time. And the critical question for us is that the Janan Luwum Day helps us, interrogate the state of human rights within Uganda. But also this week, MPs, and we've had this conversation on this show, the 2 MPs that had been in jail were released on bail, and they're home, or actually they're in hospital getting treatment post their jail experience. So today we want to talk about the state of human rights in Uganda, but also put a highlight on, the impact of Janan Luwum in understanding, our human rights situation as Uganda, and then also flag into understanding, the critical issues around justice, the judiciary, and power, and the release of the MPs. And to help me have this conversation, I have, as usual, Chemonges, Timothy from Parliament Watch. Welcome, Timothy.
Thank you, Tricia, and I'm glad to be here. Good morning to our viewers.
Yes, and next to him, not so new to all of us, but new on Focus on Parliament, we have Mr. Okidi Christopher, who is a political economist and a lawyer. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Tricia. It's a pleasure to be here for the first time.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I hope you come back again.
Yeah, why not?
Indeed. And gentlemen, maybe to...
It is just being a responsible citizen.
Yes.
You need to be part of such conversations.
Indeed.
No matter the landscape. I know people are scared.
I know.
I'm sure you're also scared.
I try not
Aren't
to
you
be
scared?
I'm not scared.
Gentlemen, to start us off, we celebrate, Archbishop Janan Luwum and the role he played in, speaking truth to power on human rights violations in the Idi Amin regime. But just an overview of what that means when we look to today and the situations that are happening in Uganda. What does that mean for us as we celebrate, this moment in time for the 8th year in a row? Do we have a seemingly, changing narrative around human rights commitments and human rights violations within Uganda? I'll begin with you, Timothy.
Thank you, Tricia. And probably the reflection around the celebrations of Janan Luwum, a very great leader, who a lot is left for us to learn from, both as individuals and even as government, and even any other institution. I think it's a place where we should pick a lot. However, even as we look into this, it's good to realize that we have different entities within the government that are charged with this mandate to support. I know at an individual basis there is a responsibility, and the Constitution discharges it to each and every one of us. But of course, we have institutions like Parliament, which play a very, very key role in ensuring that there is sanity, but there's also things are done in a streamlined way. And there, of course, when you talk about Parliament, you look at their roles, which is largely in four folds. One is the legislation, and in this, what we mean is that Parliament is charged with a mandate of putting in place laws, including those that are speaking to human rights, respect of the same, but also provision. We have the law on legal aid bill that is still pending before the House, and of course there are many other bills that are put in place. Two, as specifically on the roles of Parliament, you have the role on oversight, for which is also a very, very key role. You've noticed that there are matters to do with human rights have been raised over and over. The committees have presented reports. Members have presented matters of national importance on human rights. I know that when we talk about human rights, many times you make almost two steps ahead and almost 6 behind. So you find that you are in the same space. The conversations on human rights seems to be a very elusive one. On the other role, on budgeting, and that's where Parliament comes very, very clearly on that, is on sharing the resources that we have. And I think when we reflect on matters to do with human rights, I think Parliament plays a very key role. I think there should be a very, very firm position as far as funding institutions that are charged with the mandate of ensuring of promotion and respecting of human rights. You have the police, you have the Human Rights Commission, and really other agencies, including the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. There has to be a very, very firm position that Parliament takes, that as we disburse money to you, matters to do with human rights, people have sacrificed a lot, including this government, as they came to being. Part of one of their strongest position was that matters that the previous governments were practicing as far as respect of human rights and things they didn't want to see. That was it was a result for them to actually come and take over and create sanity. Unfortunately, we are seeing very, very many and unfortunate incidents. And of course, lastly, at least as far as Parliament is concerned, is the representation, a very, very key mandate. That what people desire, what people need, should find itself on the floor of Parliament. So that you see, if especially on this conversation, Parliament comes very, very clearly. However, we also we have other entities like the Human Rights Commission, and I think not an arm, but an entity within government that plays a very key role, at least in terms of oversight, but also on the day-to-day running and checks and balances under the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. The issues to do with funding, they raise concerns with things to do with funding. I've read the report on the Auditor General's report, specifically on the Human Rights Commission. Of course, issues to do with funding come up, but also in terms of their capacity to investigate, their capacity to conclude matters still remain pending. That means that the matters which are raised, they cannot be conclusively handled. These matters should ideally find itself in the annual human rights report, which they also are required to present to Parliament. So, with that context, you see that the picture, even as we celebrate the Janan Luwum Day, there is a lot to be learned. That those of us who are charged with the mandate of promoting, of ensuring that there is sanity within the society, even at an individual basis, you realize that the resolve that Janan Luwum had should be picked with all of us. Of course, he was a church leader, and also that speaks to our current leadership within the church institutions. How strong, how firm can they speak to power? How can they demand for accountability? It's an area that I think we desire, that there should be better, but also we should be able to make more efforts on the same. Yeah. And
let me bring Okidi in. This week on Twitter and across all social media platforms, the gentleman Mwesigwa made, a declaration that he was tortured by the security organs of this country and security forces. But also in that very conversation, the spokesperson of the UPDF said, "We've checked with all our security entities, and he was not in custody of any." And so he pushed the mandate for this gentleman to find redress with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. But also, as we celebrated Janan Luwum Day, the Premier for Uganda, OHT, Peter Maiga, said it's a contradiction for us to be celebrating, a person who spoke against torture and violence of Ugandans with images of torture and violence awash the internet. And so it's a question of, have we not understood the reason as to why Janan Luwum was killed? Or are we making the same mistake of celebrating a person only to be doing the same vices as not just a state, but also as the security organs of this country?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with the Katikiro, because it is first of all an irony or even a travesty to be celebrating a human rights icon of the stature of Janan Luwum. And then you also have Mwesigwa, who has literally been ironed. Because if you look at his chest, it is as if someone put a flat iron on his chest. Now, certainly, Mwesigwa was actually tortured, because I don't think there's no individual who can iron his own chest.
Indeed.
So, whereas I do not have any concrete information on who tortured him or what, at least one thing I am sure of is that he was tortured. He cannot torture himself.
True.
He can, yeah. So I also don't want to be very hard on Kulaije, but the only message for me, when I also saw the tweet, I completely said, but this is maybe someone trying to clean or sanitize government. But at the end of it all, even if he had verified that there is nowhere, no record of his incarceration, but at least one thing he should be sure of is that Mwesigwa cannot torture himself. So certainly he was tortured. And torture, by the way, is a very bad situation, because human rights generally are supposed to, you see, human rights is civilization, because these are global civilization, global norms, you see, that governance should be with that when you lead people, you must always have in your mind their rights, because at the end of it all, even the whole idea of modern state is anchored on the whole idea of human rights, because electoral engagements derive, enfranchisement, all derive from the whole issues around human rights. So torture is something that everyone must condemn. Kulaije, and by the way, the state is a duty bearer in human rights enforcement and in human rights protection. So whereas they deny, they should look for who actually tortured the citizen.
Yes,
in fact, me, I would actually agree with Otafire again, because Otafire also, when as internal affairs minister, when he was put on the spot about the increasing forced disappearance of citizens, what Otafire said is that, but government is supposed to protect citizens. So no one should actually torture citizens, and government should protect. He actually even encouraged that people should report to government those who violate their rights. So for me, actually, I would think the governmental approach should be that way, because considering our history, we come from, even when you read the preamble of our constitution, Ugandans are literally crying about their history.
People knowing our history choose to walk
Ugandans
this path.
are really crying about their history. They've seen a lot of human rights abuses during the British time, during Amin, during all these, and even now during Museveni's time. Uganda has always had human rights abuses. And last week, when I appeared on the chat show with my two other colleagues, I actually made an argument and said that Uganda as a country has ratified a lot of human rights conventions. And Uganda overdoes it. And in fact, even if there is another very progressive convention tomorrow, Uganda will be the first to append their signatures. But there is a mismatch between what is on paper and what we see in practice. That is why now some of us within the legal and political academy are now beginning to say that I think there is something fundamentally wrong with the design of the Ugandan state. Yeah, because, and by the way, we shouldn't even look at the Museveni's regime in isolation. We should look at the entire old regimes that have been in Uganda. And more especially when we are now anchoring the discussion on Janan Luwum, which was also another regime, which is not today's regime. So what actually happens is that for us, I think our state, the state we have, and our orientation as the people within this state is not an orientation, and the structure of the state is not that which supports human rights. Because our state is a colonial state. We are still running that software of a colonial state. And what was it designed for? It was designed, one, to extract resources, extract loyalty from the people. And how do you extract it? Through use of force.
Yeah,
So the British also extracted loyalty and taxes from the Ugandan people using force. Second, Obote also extracted loyalty of the Ugandan people using force. Amin also used force, and that is why we lost Janan Luwum. And Museveni now has just perfected the whole
So it's almost like it's
software
the
of the
same
state.
playbook.
Yeah, so the issue here is we need to now focus more on structure analysis of the country's human rights situation. Because even if you brought Chemonges tomorrow as president, or Okidi as president, Tricia as president, with such a state, you know, a state which is designed to not work for the people, not protect the people, but demand. So I think our first, if we could, and you, by the way, Uganda is going to go a political transition soon. And these are the discussions that we need to perhaps engage on in transition. That now we are going to transit from Museveni or from this current present political dispensation to another political dispensation. So in that political dispensation, we now need a dispensation where human rights are respected, where citizens are not tortured, citizens are not ironed. But how do we then get there? We can only get there when we address structural enablers and drivers to human rights abuses. Otherwise, agency, if we are to focus on individuals, agency, they were here Ugandans. Oh, if you want to address human rights, elect Besigye as president. If you want to address human rights, elect Chagulanyi as president. Chagulanyi, Besigye, Mugisha Muntu, Mao, all these guys are going to be doing the same thing unless we change our structure and orientation regarding our state and what human rights is. That is then how we can transition away from the present Uganda and maybe become like Kenya next door. Because Kenya, the police do not really manhandle people the way. In fact, I was in Nairobi last month and a boda was telling me, man, how are you enjoying our freedom? Fine, please enjoy. This is a free country, you know. I would really love Uganda to be such a country. But to get to that point, it will require deliberate engagement on the part of citizens. And our political elite also now need to understand that really we are now past the primordial state where you have to extract loyalty. You extract loyalty through reasoning. Calm down. If Okidi is putting up a point, come sit also like Chemonges and reason with Okidi. Yeah, we believe that should be the kind of war that should be in Uganda. Intellectual warfare, not physically battering people. Now, the issue of Janan Luwum, we all respect Janan Luwum, and we all agree that the 16th of Feb should actually be a memorial to always bring him back to our memory so that his values can inspire us. Now, for me, my only misgiving with the manner in which government is approaching the whole Luwum issue is that the circumstances surrounding the death of Luwum up to now, it is still a contested history. You see? And this country has a lot of contested histories. Because if you ask an Okidi like me, who consumes economic data, I will actually tell you that Idi Amin, whereas the fingers of the death of Luwum points at Idi Amin, Idi Amin also made very serious achievements for this country. Amin bought for Uganda properties abroad. Uganda never used to rent high commissions and embassies abroad. Amin bought one in West Germany, in UK, in America, all over the place. you know. But now every time people are going to discuss about memorializing General Luwum is now the demonization of Idi Amin. Why? Because as a country, we've never sat down to deal with our past. To say that, okay, as Ugandans, we've wronged each other. So how then do we reconcile? Because Amin, by the way, whereas Amin was also uncouth, it has the passage of time has already indicated that Amin is a proper DNA of a Ugandan president. You see that?
True.
That is actually what we now discover from Amin. So Amin was merely just a warning of what will happen to Uganda in the future and the kind of leaders we are going to have in the future. Because if we are talking about Amin in the 70s, but now in the 2020s, we still have citizens being abducted, just like the way Luwum was abducted. But also the life of Luwum should also speak to religious actors, because religious actors in Uganda, of late, President Museveni, you know what has happened to when you're going to be consecrated as a religious actor, you receive an envelope from the president, and then in Penkonika. So, and yet, by the way, the church is civil society.
Yeah.
Part of our problem is also that we look at civil society as NGOs.
True.
So the church may actually say, okay, the NGOs will speak about it. And then when the NGOs don't speak, the situation just increases. So we also need to broaden our own perspective of what the civil society is. The church also needs to know that they're part of the civil society. Anybody who is within, anybody who occupies that space without the market and government or the public sector is already civil society. And he must know that anything will affect him. If the economy, because rights, and when we talk about human rights are not only, by the way, political, civil political rights. Rights are also about economic, the right to food, social, education. You see? For example, right now, we have a dysfunctional public education system. And no one is talking about it. We have a dysfunctional health system. And no one is talking about it. And yet the role of citizens is to, because a social contract gives rise to social accountability. And the roles of citizens is social accountability, to hold government accountable. So for me, I think if someone is to ask my opinion regarding the entire human rights, but you know, leadership plays a very big role. President Museveni should also stop his double standards, you know. You know, President Museveni has come out several times against human rights violations. I remember last year, was it last year or 2021, he spoke about torture.
He did.
Yeah, he came out, I think, yeah, that was 2021. Not very far from the time Lokech died. He spoke about torture. And you see, as a head of state, his statements are policy. So then the question is, how Museveni should actually stop being a complainant against human rights abuses like the rest of us. For him, he's a duty bearer. His is different, because for him, what he says can cause direct change.
True.
So I think the political leadership of the country, Parliament, for example, this is focused on Parliament. Parliament, for example, should ensure that human rights monitoring mechanisms are in place, enforcement mechanisms are in place. Because, by the way, whereas we have the Uganda Human Rights Commission, if anyone did a study on citizen perception on the Human Rights Commission, I'm sure, even without being privy to any of such data, I'm sure citizen satisfaction as customers to the Human Rights Commission is not what would please the ears.
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, of the Human Rights Commission. So for now, I think.
Yeah. And you spoke to critical issues that I would want us to dive into, and maybe Chemonges, that is where you're going to come in, on the role of religious leaders, because when we speak of gender and womb, we're imagining that we've put the church at the forefront of, helping us deal with not just be the voice of reason, but also because they're the custodians of, our values. And so we imagine that they will be critical to the extrajudicial killings that are happening in Uganda today, to the abductions and the torture that is happening. But the recent appearance of the Interreligious Council of Uganda was towards homosexuality, and there was no mention of torture and abductions. And so a lot of citizens are saying there's a lot of burying their heads in the sand that is going on the actual and the critical issues that are happening within Uganda. And so every other time, they have a statement to make, we are hoping that they will speak against the abductions and the torture. And I know they did say something during the Janan Luwum Day, but long before that, I mean, from the November killings, and I'm trying to be, I'm trying to create a semblance of track from the November killings of the 2020 from the January election period to now. We've had a lot of people disappear. We've had a lot of torture happen. We've had, people that are unaccounted for. And seemingly the voice of the church has been absent in these matters. How do we marry their role and their duty in equally holding government accountable, especially because they also hold a central place in making sure, things run within a country? So how do we not just have their voice coming as and when, but constantly have them hold government accountable and also, represent the realities of who they are as custodians of our societal values?
Thank you, Tricia. And probably just need to speak one thing which Okidi here had hinted to on the aspect of the change of the basic structure for us to reach where we'd want to. I think that is the desired goal.
Yes.
It's the ultimate. But even in the short term, there are things that you realize that they are totally not linked to the basic structure. That these are things which either they are deliberate or they are intended to serve specific goal. So you have and I'll be coming to the question that you asked, just to hint on what Okidi was saying. You see things coordinated, like you see everything that happens. It's either it's coordinated or there is a semblance in how.
So it's a language
they
are speaking.
You see citizens appearing in the media. No, in the media, tortured. There is rejection, at least from the duty bearers, that no, we are not the ones.
We are not the ones.
You see the closures of some of the entities that are charged with the mandate to give an oversight, at least on the human rights aspect.
Yeah.
And what I'm talking about is the UN Human Rights Commission. You see citizens appearing before the military courts, and that is shortly after Parliament has considered the report barring making recommendations that citizens should not appear before military courts. And of course, that's a constitution. There's a constitutional court ruling on that. But of course, we've not seen maybe the Attorney General trying to challenge that position. Not yet. But you see citizens appearing before this. For me, so I think that even in the absence of the change of the basic structure, there is a lot that are just say intended to achieve a specific, and these are things which can be stopped. Even with just the change of the system, not necessarily the whole structure. Even just a change of a specific setting, a lot can be got. But speaking to the position that the church has, especially in shaping how the society thinks, how society conducts itself, because the church is one of those change agents, but also they get the mandate both from the people, but also from the, many of them say they dispense the mandate of God. And if that's the case, you clearly know that they play a very key role And speaking to what I recently saw the society of the churches,
The interreligious council of
interreligious
Uganda.
council. They came out very, very strongly on things to do with homosexuality,
Yes.
which is very good, and I think it's a positive move. However, when you become selective in what you
Exactly.
in what you condemn, on what you speak to, that becomes an issue, and
Sure.
it questions your capacity of probably your objectiveness towards some of these things. When you talk about human rights aspect, it cuts across, and every day you see either there's a citizen who has been tortured, whether by whoever it's alleged or the state. And on that note, the state actually bears a lot of power, a lot of power, intelligence. If actually they wanted to know who is behind the torture or whoever, even just not the torture, the disappearance or whoever. If actually I disappear today, I entered anyway, it will not take 24 hours before they actually get me Chemonges, Timothy, even Okidi. That's because the resources we invest in as a state, if you look at the budget and the amount of money that goes into security, it's
they
huge.
get the biggest chunk of the budget.
So I would not take the explanation of that it could be a citizen, it could be maybe people are being tortured by people we don't know, or people are disappearing and we don't know
where they are.
Even at the point when you see the complainants, we've seen the opposition actually coming out and say, our people are getting disappearing, and the opposition go ahead and present the names. Even when they just say that Timothy has disappeared, the state has the ability
to find
to see. So this Chemonges Timothy is alleged to disappear, and they have the capacity to actually pin you down and know whether it's a true fact or not. So I think sometimes when they are bouncing it back, it's just the avoidance of responsibility, and for which, of course, they must be called out on that. And so the religious leaders, really, for me, they play a key role. And even as we celebrate the Janan Looms Day and the role in which the church has, at least in how matters should run in a country, I think that force, you've seen the church coming out very strongly in homosexuality.
Yes.
So the demand is, while you've come out on that same energy, I think the same energy should be put on other elements, things to do with human rights, things to do with the corruption in the country. If you see recently, you've seen the PDM issues and how resources either are not there and that kind of thing, because it directly affects the ordinary citizen who are also your people. Yes. If I'm affected, that means my church is equally affected. And even just from economic point of view, if Timothy I disappear, it means that I may not contribute in the service of the church, and even in the financial contribution of the church, and even probably my mental capacity, at least towards the moving of the church. And so I think the church we should demand more, that they should come out not on selective matters. And also that maybe speaks to whoever calls the piper calls the shot. I don't know what's the
he who pays the piper.
He who pays the piper
calls the tune.
Yeah, so I guess it's maybe it speaks also to the fact that they're also aware that I think we have to go slow on other areas. But I think that it should be our consistent demand that the church, you play a very key role in the society. You do a good job in ensuring that there's sanity, in ensuring that people are well groomed, people are taught as the Bible would ideally say, where it says. There should be the demand for those for our church leaders to call for accountability, for sanity in the country.
Yeah. And you said something that maybe Okidi also can touch on, the reality that violence can be a language or something that sends a message to people. And so to see these things happen, to see extrajudicial killings happen without, a right of responsibility taken on is more or less a lesson or a language that sends a message to the people. But in contrast, if you looked at it's very sad that today we look at the NRM government in contrast with the Idi Amin government. It should never be a benchmark on, seeing which regime is at the overwhelm of torture and violence. But when you look in contrast with the Idi Amin, regime around the dungeons of Nakasaro, if you read a lot of the, history of people who have written the experiences in that regime, and fast forward into, a seemingly new Uganda where we have land military officers, land IGPs. Kale Kahura was a whole lawyer. Yeah. We had Tinyifunza with a master's. We had Mayombo with a master's. Yeah. Yes, Muhozi has a master's. So with all this wealth of education, you would imagine that the experiences within the state that shouldn't be the norm, that torture shouldn't be the norm, that military courts should not even be happening because you have the knowledge of the law and you can be able to channel these civilians in the right places. But how do we create, and then it's a confusion of mind because it doesn't make sense with people that have this land and maybe would forgive Amin for having it in P4 and most probably had the ignorance of life or the education that we have, but also with the experiences of people that have traveled, that sit in international conferences and international regional bodies. How do we create a juxtapose on the reality of violence in Uganda today with the wealth of knowledge of the people that serve in this government?
Yeah, one thing is that I don't want to go into comparing Amin and Museveni because, first of all, Amin was only 9 years in power, 1971 to 70.
True.
Yeah, to 79. And Museveni has been here since 1986.
Four decades.
Yeah, for 4 decades. So definitely, by any metrics, you definitely find more human rights violations under Museveni than under Amin. Yes, because Amin, like me who comes from northern Uganda, what is happening is not new to me. Because in northern Uganda, for us, we had the LRA war. People were cordoned off and put, the entire north was cordoned off and people were herded into IDP camps. I personally lived in IDP camps, so I really know the human rights situation there. So in terms of, I don't want to enter into comparison, but what I'm saying is that as Uganda, we have not yet found a state that supports human rights. Now, because the human rights in Uganda is state violence, really. State violence. I have never heard of Timothy torture anybody. Or I have never heard of you, Tricia, torture anybody. But every time someone is tortured, it must be the state and state official. So it still goes back to my point that the nature of the state determines how the state operates. So we are not surprised with this state violence because the state itself was designed for violence. You see that? Yeah, but you make a very interesting issue that we need to interrogate. The educational level of security of guys at the top of Uganda security. President Museveni, who is the commander-in-chief, is a graduate of political science and economics at Dar es Salaam. And President Museveni himself, when he was at Dar es Salaam, he was a favorite of people like Walter Rodney. Yes.
He was in the Fornasa.
Yeah, for NASA, he was in the favorite. In fact, Museveni should actually be very ashamed of himself because his mentors died defending freedom. People like Walter Rodney. He was killed in Guyana because of defending freedom. Nelson Mandela. You know, by the way, Museveni has a very good relationship with Nelson Mandela, to a point that Nkonto Wesizwe at one point was given sanctuary here. Now, Mandela is a global icon of human rights. So why doesn't Museveni just be maybe 2% of his mentors? We would not even be discussing human rights issues here. Yes, we would not be having this conversation. And also in the NRM 10-point program. In fact, the NRM 10-point program has now become like the animal farm, where they keep amending it every time, depending on the interests of the political and ruling elite. Because what took them to the bush is democracy. In fact, Museveni went to the bush to fight for human rights. How come he has now failed to establish human rights for 40 years? Because when he went to the bush, he had an election was stolen.
Sure.
Yes, an election was stolen. And that election of 1980 was actually stolen. Uganda has never had a free, fair, transparent electoral system. You see that? So he went to the bush because an election was stolen. So if he went to the bush because an election was stolen, why then does he continue to also do the same things that took him to the bush? So me, I think it is just the whole idea. And I'm not surprised because Museveni is a socialist. Me, I'm a capitalist, by the way. And you know, socialists, you know, I've since realized that socialists campaign in socialism, but govern in capitalism. While capitalists campaign in capitalism and govern in socialism. You see that? Yes, that is actually what I have since seen. So, look at the police. We've had Kaiura at the helm of police.
Yeah.
Do you know, by the way, in the Black Mamba, the Black Mamba where the Black Mamba incident about a decade ago, do you know it was actually led by a military commander who was a master's in law? You see?
Wow.
And I think, I don't know, maybe our law schools should also teach you people to be better lawyers and to respect. I think it is also a problem with the cram work in schools nowadays. People just go and cram and cram and cram.
And do exams and get out.
And then they do exam, they get their first class and go away. Now, when they go to the field, they don't actually really know that this thing which is being taught is actually true. And it has to be applied somewhere in society. You see? Now, it is then there was now the CDF David Mohozi was David Mohozi is in fact David Mohozi is just like me, law and political science, the advantage of both. But I think we who have who blend these two information are better people, because I think it was a better CDF. Anyway, because I've had an incident with a colleague of mine who was in the military in CMI detention for over 1 month. And I went to follow up the matter until I went up to his office. And the matter was resolved. Because they were again complaining, hey, you know, it was Labor Day. So our friend, so we were organizing Labor Day, but we are so sorry about this. Your friend will be released because after all, it has to be unconditional release. He has overstayed in this detention facility. So that tells you how the mind of a leader is very important in terms of institutions. Yeah. So if Museveni could also have such a mindset, we would have a better country in terms of human rights. I don't want to even imagine if this is NRM and how their perspective of human rights, then I don't want to imagine them fighting in Luwero vis-a-vis the laws of war. So if you can disregard human rights when you're in charge of a state, then how then did you disregard human rights when you were in the bush?
Because
did they respect the laws of armed conflict? You know, I am even now beginning to think that all those skulls that were put, that those days used to be lined along the Luwero Road to demonize us from northern Uganda that we are killers. I think I am now beginning to have a better understanding on the origin of those skulls. Because if those skulls were indeed our skulls, we from northern Uganda who were accused for being in charge of those skulls, if those skulls are actually ours, we would actually see it from the behavior of state agencies. But now, if state agencies also iron people like this, then I'm sure those are not our skulls.
I hear you. And the IRCU, Chemonges, the IRCU was at the helm of the national dialogue. And 4 years back, I was part of the people that, were trying to create the intellectual work around the national dialogue. And the efforts around the national dialogue died suddenly. There was conversation between, church and state, and it died. But I recognize the importance of a national dialogue where we stand right now, because the tensions are high and there's a lot of mistrust, but also there are past hurts we've not yet dealt with. How do we resurrect? And it doesn't need to be the church at the helm. It could be the elders, because even in that conversation, the elders were part of, the people that pushed for the dialogue. How do we create, legitimacy around having a national dialogue so that we can, have a semblance of resolution, consensus around very many issues with it that are happening in Uganda today?
Thank you, Tricia. So maybe just before I comment that, I think that what's happening and what we keep seeing, what worries me most is the generation that is currently probably the younger generation. They are growing up in a space where violence is being normalized, and it's worse that it's a national. They are growing up in a space where people are being tortured left, right, and like that seems to be the
norm.
The abductions, aspects to do with human rights are not given the attention they deserve. You may not give a clear verdict, at least, of what you think may happen, but at least you can suspect that the current generation of the children, probably the people whom you think that they are the future of the country, you can actually think of how they are going to deal with these specific things in future. Of course, you have the victims, you have the people who are probably being blamed to be responsible for some of these things, but at least you can see what you can suspect of what you can tell. And so it's not a very nice experience. And so even as we discuss aspects to do with human rights, I think that there's a huge responsibility that we bear for the different generations.
And so we must be dealing with it with urgency.
Yeah, it's a very serious thing, because you see, you don't want to transition, you don't want to have abuse, things to do with human rights, which are very critical, moving from one generation to another. If it is not the practice, it is the anger, it is the conviction that these people from this specific place, this one or whoever,
and like Okidi says, we still have a lot of past unresolved issues as well.
So and that actually speaks to the questions that you put forth on the need for a national conversation, and the national conversation aspects to do with goodwill, at least from the political actors. Those are at least the duty bearers. It's a conversation. I think it's long overdue, and I know that national conversation may not be the magic bullet. I think there has to, because it's a progressive. It will be we've come from far.
Yeah, we have.
People are angered. There are people who even continue to, because you see, every time you iron someone's chest, you are not only affecting the immediate family, but also you're affecting it's a whole ecosystem. A person loses their life today. You have the dependents whose life has been taken on another shift totally. And so if that's the picture that probably we need to have when speaking to this. And so the thing to do with national conversation, I know it's good, and that also requires that we have to be honest. You've seen the other countries having this sort of discourses, but again they go back to where they were. And even as we've seen, we say that you're making it 2 steps ahead
and
make so many of them backwards. And so it's the same thing. Probably even the national conversation could be part of those many strategies that we employ as a country to ensure that aspect. And I think human rights alone, when you talk about human rights, as Okidi has said, it's not only the political rights.
It's the whole of it.
Socio-economic, cultural rights. And it's huge. Although I think many times, especially in our setting, human rights is directly linked
civil
to and political
because
rights.
Of the political
because
questions.
of the political questions. But I think it goes beyond that. You've seen things to do with land ownership. You see people being evicted. The level of poverty in our society.
Even our values as a society.
Values. So it is it's a whole thing that has to be addressed. And all stakeholders, including the religious leaders, also play a very key role. The cultural leaders.
Yeah.
Because there is fear, and many people fear. And many people you talk to, their immediate response will be, so if I speak, what next?
What next?
I'm likely to be thrown in by the black the drone. So I know it's not a very interesting space to be in, but at least there has to be effort put in by everyone, including those who are charged with the responsibility in the society. And that includes the religious leaders, the cultural leaders, and even at individual basis. So those are things which you see at a family level. These things actually affect the basic structure of the society.
Yeah.
So it is that serious. But I'm sure that with time and as Okidi mentions, there is the change of political dispensations. Probably there is hope that things will change. Probably there is need for a total overhaul of the structure. But I think that's a long term. It's a long term. And even as we get there, we see people disappearing. People cannot afford the level of unemployment and many issues that we still face. And by the way, just to mention that the 1995 Constitution, which also has faced a number of amendments, that the Constitution is so special that it actually puts a whole chapter to focus on human rights, to emphasize on, and actually it operationalizes it and Article 50 by putting up an institution. The human rights, I think it's Article 50 or I think Article 51, around there, puts up an institution to help in the actualization, but also oversight of the same. You have Parliament as an institution, but also so that is something that has to be. It's so special, and as a country we are privileged. Yes, I think there is a link between the law, both the local, the national laws, the ones which we ratify, the international laws, and in the actual implementation of that. Yeah.
And maybe certainly on that point, I'd want us to go into the conversation around, the release of Honorable Segirinya and Honorable Sawanyana. That was something that also kept the internet awash with narratives of whether there was a deal or not. But the realities of our judicial systems, it has been 17 months since they were granted bail. And we're not talking about since they were granted bail. But after that, rearrested. And we've had a cycle of court in, court out, court in, court out. And all of a sudden, 17 months later, 1 and so many months later, 1 year, a whole year and plus, they're released. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that they weren't arrested alone. There were other people attached to that case that were equally arrested, that most probably have stayed back. But when you look at, the miscarriage of justice in Uganda today, but critically on the highlight of the released MPs, do we have a semblance of confidence in the judicial system of the country?
Yeah, the two MPs are personally known to me, especially Alan Sewanyana, who I was supposed to contest with for National Youth Leader of the Democratic Party in 2015. And he chose to give way and made my winning easy. So Alan Sewanyana is someone very close to me. I know him, and Segirinya, I've also been in opposition with them. So it is really, I've been pitying them, their family, and all what they've been going through. But my response to that question will be picking up from where Chemonges stopped. He said that we have a beautiful constitution, which even has chapter 4. Yeah, but we already agreed that the reality of paper in Uganda is different from the practice. The practice, yes. So because you see, like, in fact, actually, that even illustrates my point even better when I talk about the need to realign the state so that the state supports human rights. Because you see, now you have a constitution that is there, very beautiful. And by the way, Uganda's constitution is a very beautiful constitution. That is one of the best constitutions I've ever seen. And it is modeled around the South African constitution. That's why you see we even have similar cases like, is it Susan Chigula and Mwakanyane? And Mwakanyane. You notice they're very similar. And the experts were from Australia, right? Yeah, the experts of our constitution. So that tells you that our constitution, the basic structure of our constitution was liberalism. And that is why you have a whole chapter 4 on human rights. That is liberalism. That the structure of our society should be liberal. We need a liberal society, political liberalism, respect for human rights, electoral integrity, enfranchisement of people, social accountability, separation of powers. All that is in our constitution. And all those are aspects of political liberalism. We also have social liberalism around our culture, social life. Yeah, but of course in Uganda the contention is around social liberalism regarding homosexuality. Yeah, that is still something that Ugandans are struggling with accepting.
They're really struggling.
Yeah, they're struggling with accepting it. But that is social. Liberalism. And the basic structure of the constitution even has that. Meanwhile, because even when you look at the same human rights, they will tell you, do not discriminate. So why are they saying do not discriminate? Do not kill. So why are they saying? So regardless of what anyone is doing, we should never reach a point of killing people because of who they are. You see? That is actually what our constitution. But now the reality is that you have a very beautiful constitution with a very good structure of liberalism being operating on a state that does not support it. So it is like a bishop preaching from the shrine of a witch doctor instead of preaching from his pulpit. Definitely the message and the practice won't be gotten. Yeah, so unless we have a proper state, then our constitution will work. Now, this also brings us to whether, because that state talks about political liberalism, and in a liberal democracy, courts exist as conflict resolution mechanisms.
True.
Yes, that if I have a land problem with the Chemonges, we should go to the land division of the High Court and sort it out. If it is an electoral dispute, we should go into the High Court and sort it out. If it is a constitutional question, there is a constitutional court. Yeah, why? Because we are not supposed to go to the bush to address issues around, because we already have courts. Now, if courts are dysfunctional, you cannot even get bail from a court, and yet the law says you can get bail, including mandatory bail, after some period of time, and you're still denied all this. Then what that tells you that it is no longer the law. It is now just some bad manners of some individuals, which is causing a miscarriage of justice. Now, One thing is that when we look at our courts, throughout our history, we've really had a judiciary that has really tried. By the way, let me tell you people a story that in the 70s, during the same Amin who killed this Bishop Luhum, do you know that in the 70s, in that period, actually Remi Kasule, no, not Remi Kasule, John Bosco Katutsi, or one of the two, actually sent Amin's wife in prison.
Wow.
And yet Amin was head of state. Over, he was a magistrate somewhere around Busia in the border. It was around trade, trade-related issues and the border. So, even the Amin who people ostracize, or people demonize so much, vilify, his wife became a victim of the courts of law. Now, do you think anyone in the first family can be sentenced? For example, Muhozi, it is alleged, tortured Kakwenza. But up to now, it is business as usual. We've not even had Muhozi being arraigned in court.
Or any suspects there.
Yes, or any suspects being arraigned in court. So that also tells you that there is... That is why, like I said, I was really trying to avoid to make comparisons between Amin and Museveni, because of some of these details within our reach, that at one point Katutsi had to convict Amin's wife. I don't think there's any judge in Uganda currently who can convict Museveni's wife, Museveni's child, or any other close related person. And yet, the law says equality before the law. For Museveni, we understand, as president, he has some immunities. He's entitled to certain immunities. But immunities for the first family is not blanket. It is just for the president, which is tagged to his office as president. So, so at the end of it all, when we look at our courts, what I can actually say that it's a roller coaster, you know? It's a roller coaster. That it is cyclical, that we continue moving in a circle of a good judiciary, bad judiciary, good. We've never been in a constant of... And by the way, let me tell you, collapse of rule of law institutions leads to state failure, state fragility, and state collapse. And in Uganda, if we are not careful and we make these institutions, because even the ineptness of the present judiciary, or the perception of ineptness, should not be encouraged. The judiciary should actually be supported to function better. Because once judiciary collapses, police collapses, the army collapses, the state has collapsed. And what I'm talking about is not far-fetched, because I think 2 months, 3 months ago, the US released a report on Uganda, saying Uganda is now a fragile state. You see? Now, state fragility is assessed around this. First of all, factionalism within the state. There is no one doing anything to bring everyone on board in Uganda to rebuild the nation. All people are doing is to create their own power fiefdoms and continue the very bitter contest without even a policy perspective. Because I've never heard NRM talk about any serious policy matter for Uganda. I've never heard NUP speak about any serious political policy matter. Maybe the Democratic Party those days, when I used to be there, they used to speak. Alliance just creates some facade of policy people, but I don't really think. I've not even seen any alliance policy other than the leap, something which resembles the leap forward of the UK, the one when we used at launching Alliance at the Serena hotel. That is the only policy document I have seen from Alliance. So in Uganda, politics, by the way, in Uganda is just it's just a turn to it.
Let me bring in Chemonges on, the courts seemingly now look like, weapons to silence dissenters, because, you're gone for 17 months and then you come out and either you're mined or you rush into exile, and I'll say for that because, right after the torture of Kakwenza, he had to actually flee the country. Stella Nyanzi had to flee the country after, even when she had been acquitted of all her cases. And then you have Honorable Sowanyana mimed and he can't speak. And Honorable, Segirinya is also bedridden. And so
even Nicholas
Opio fled off. Are prisons and courts becoming weapons of the state to silence its dissenters?
Yeah, so thank you, Tricia. And first I must mention that, the judiciary is one of the arms of government, because that's how ideally the state operates, through the different arms of government. And ideally they're supposed to operate not alone, but they're supposed to coordinate in their work, because you have parliament which is passing the laws, and then the judiciary here comes in to create some sort of sanity, but also give positions on them. And so for me, I've seen recently when you saw the Chief Justice actually coming out very clear and saying, no, we cannot continue holding suspects for this long. If there is no case to answer for them, they should be released. That's the Chief Justice coming out, and at least that is on the members of Parliament. Actually, if you look at the Human Rights Committee report, one of the concerns which has actually been raised is that the delays in justice, the number of people who are in prisons whose matters have not even come to court to be heard. And by the way, you know,
so many people in remand.
Very many people on remand. Of course, there could have been the concerns could be that maybe the workforce is less, that maybe the judicial officers are less to help in
No, but also the East African Court of Justice, requested that if there is overwhelming backlog within these systems, and because it's also a court that can also help, there should be cases that should be able to go there. And they're not that busy. I mean, when they were here in December, they did a lot of work. They did over 40 cases in less than a week. And it's revelation that if you definitely do have backlog, outsource the support so that we don't have a lot of people stuck in the prison system, some for petty crimes. Because they are there. They are chicken thieves in prison today. And the unfortunate bit is they would remand for 3 to 4 years, only to come out and, have no case to answer.
And government thieves in their offices.
Exactly. So can we bank on the prison systems, the military force of this country, and the judicial systems in not being used as weapons to silence dissent? Because I fear we have a precedent now. If you have 17 months on record of a person who has not seen justice and then they just keep coming and going, even when they had been granted bail, it's questionable in, who calls the shots at the end of the day. Because I know for a fact that these MPs were rearrested after they had been granted bail. And it was after the statements of the president on, how dare you give, people with aggravated, crimes, that kind of bail. So can we, bank on their independence, on their ability to function without the state hand, or without, being turned into machineries to fight, the opposition?
Yeah, so if you look at judiciary as a standalone, by the way, they do a good job. I think it's on some of these cases where you find either they are used as conduits, but largely within the context, you see that sometimes they go out of their way to address all matters, sometimes which are before them. But there are instances where I think, judiciary as an arm of government, depending on the ruling government, can actually be used as a tool, as one of the arms to curtail freedoms. And that you've seen, and if you see the manner in which sometimes some of the judicial officers maybe come in place, that also speaks to the independence. But also you've seen progressively, at least for our judiciary, there is move towards ensuring that they're independent. That's also, of course, it's a desired goal really to have them independent so that their decisions are independent. But as we stand now, it's true that they are not as independent as would desire, because you see many times the manner in which some of the rulings, especially these political ones, come out. You notice that either they are skewed towards the state side, but also justice must not just be done; it must also be seen to be done. Yeah, and so that's I think the dilemma sometimes that we face ourselves in. You see, and you mentioned the things of rearresting the citizens. I know that it is within the mandate and the powers of the state to rearrest you, because partly of what we had sometimes discussed here, that because you cannot appeal bail, you cannot appeal it. Sometimes the state has the leverage to now just rearrest you immediately after you've been granted bail. And so for me, I think it is in the manner in which the state tries to use its mandate. You've seen the MPs recently who were granted bail, whether it was negotiated or otherwise. It's good that they are out, but the 17 months have been a hell on them. Not just on them, but even the people around them. They are people they represent, their families, and that kind of thing. And so I think the concerns which we raise, judiciary is not as innocent also as probably would want to have them be. But they are also affected by this same thing, because the society is not in isolation. People don't operate in isolation. You find that it's a whole cycle. And what is affecting this other side find itself also on the other side. I think it's an effort that we have to continue pushing. Yeah.
Interesting. As because we're coming to the end of this conversation. Now when we look and where we're seated, we still have the question of the massacre killings, because we don't have answers to that. The trial has not yet begun. There are people that are still in prison outside, the 2 MPs that were released. Do we see the reality of justice, rolling out for the victims that died in the massacre killings?
I think it is still going to be more repetition, because at the end of it all, justice. By the way, that was last week when I said that I was actually speaking about the instrumentalization of justice, using justice as a tool, as a political tool. Yeah, so because at the end of it all, when you're dealing with the questions around citizens and justice, you need to know that you first of all need to know that even that power alone derives from them. You see that? Because in Uganda, judicial power derives from the people. I still remember that case very well, also Traco, when the Justice Ngonda Ntende actually gave a dichotomy of the British system and the Ugandan system. And he said, whereas in Britain it is the sovereign and the person in whom justice is anchored on is the queen, in Uganda it is the total opposite. It is the people. So so when you now try to deny the people who even have a stake, because by the way, government needs to know that they alone cannot guarantee security. That state institutions without the people cannot guarantee security. Just like courts without the people cannot dispense justice. And that is why they say justice must be seen to be done so that it continues to mobilize popular sentiments and mobilize support for the judiciary. You see that? So the judiciary should also be interested in mobilizing support towards it. Because when you mobilize support for the judiciary from the people, you're going to dispense then justice. Now imagine a situation where the people of Masaka actually think that justice is not being served. The court situation is not work. Then who are they working for? Meaning they're actually working for someone else other than
the people.
Yes, other than the people. So the law can be instrumentalized. In fact, there are two concepts I always like telling people. That there is lawfare. Lawfare, which is war with the law, you know? You go and battle it out in court. That I have a constitutional issue with you, we go to court and battle it. That is lawfare. And then there's warfare, where we go to the bush. And then me, I send my missiles over to your side. You also send your missiles over to my side.
Yeah.
You see? But that is not how you ensure the peace of the state. In fact, if Uganda is interested in being a peaceful country, there is only one magic wand, and that is rule of law. And who are the guardians of rule of law? The rock of ages of justice? They are the judicial officer. Meaning judicial officers should at all moments be independent. You know what happened to Malema Birizi, for example? Where Malema Birizi is a victim of lawfare. He's a very peaceful citizen who just thinks that, for me, if I want to fight an injustice, let me go to court. Man, I have never found a peaceful citizen like that. Now, if Malema Birizi was like Museveni, he would go to Luwero. If he's annoyed, he would go to Luwero. You see that? But here, he's going to the court. So courts, in fact, our judiciary, our judicial system should know that they are the biggest guarantors of peace. Because courts in a democracy exist for conflict resolution. And they must all at all times be concerned about their reputation, their connection with their customers, the people they serve. And that is why if Masaka people are still waiting for justice, then I think it is a failure. The state and the judiciary is failing the people of Masaka.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? What remedies can we have from the occurrences that have happened? And just to paint a picture, the abductions continue, the torture continues. And maybe for instances where we don't see people, the disappearances continue. But also the miscarriage of justice continues. So what remedies do we pick from this moment in time for us to move forward, but also to build forward?
Yes, so specifically for me, this being a focus on Parliament. Parliament first for me is one of those immediate avenues that I think that as citizens we can continue to demand for accountability, for action. Parliament is charged with the mandate of oversight, also budget. I keep mentioning, and I think we cannot continue funding indiscipline, abuse of human rights. There has to be accountability. That even before we appropriate money to the ministry of A, B, C, D, there has to be accountability of the previous time. What have you done? What are the issues? How can we address them? Is it the law? Is it the political will? But also, I know that sometimes the political system overbears many of the things that happen. And even as you talk about Parliament, sometimes the politics overbears some of these institutions. But I think it's in the continued engagements, in the continued demanding by the citizens through their MPs. You've seen the Auditor General's report. It actually highlights a number of things. Many times I think that others are considered, others are not considered. You've seen the committee, the Human Rights Committee. Recently, they presented a report on the Human Rights Committee, the human rights situation in the country. And it's a very beautiful report. I think the challenge now is in the actualization of this. They make beautiful recommendations. Do not try citizens in military courts. Try as much as possible to provide an electoral system that is fair and just, and many of these very beautiful aspects. But how do you actualize them? I think that's the biggest link. But for us as citizens, we have to continue demanding. There is need for more awareness. As my colleague here is saying, citizens are the anchor of anything. And so the more they are aware, then you provide an avenue in which they can demand for accountability. A citizenry that is aware of their rights, is aware of how they can call for accountability of the same is very key. And therefore, for me, at the end of the day, it goes back to the citizens. I know that many times we want to refer to ourselves as victims, but we still hold a lot of power. You have institutions like the church. It's in us demanding that even as you come to address things that you think are wrong, things to do with homosexuality, please let's also demand for accountability on many other things that are happening, so that then there is some sort of sanity. We are speaking with the same voice and calling for and demanding for accountability on the same.
Where do we go? What remedies for our occurrences?
One thing is that citizens need to be supported, because I think citizens are also part of the problems. Because if you have an ineffective parliament, a parliament of people who cannot conceptualize certain policies and praxis, I think for me that alone tells me that the citizens also need help. Because if you leave it entirely in the hands of citizens, I have contested for parliament 3 times in Uganda, at least I can speak, meaning I've interacted with citizens several times. And what I always see in my interaction, not only be competing in parliament, I've also been national youth leader of DP. So I interface with citizens. So these citizens also, you go to meet them, all they're interested in is alcohol. Yes, they're interested in alcohol. And that is why the parliament, we have that parliament because the parliament is the measure of our electorate.
True.
Yes, so I think citizens also need to be helped. And lucky for us, Uganda is now a global, we are global, within globalization. This is a global village. And so tools like sanctions will have to apply. And I was particularly happy in the past 5 years, between 2016 to 2021, where we saw foreign governments working with ordinary citizens to compile human rights data of human rights violation, and taking it before international human rights bodies, UPR, taking it to United Nations. And also we've seen sanctions as a result of that. Because one, the world is run on a software of liberalism, respect for human rights, all those aesthetics of political liberalism must be respected, must be seen within your political arrangement. So when they are absent, it should also concern the world in this cosmopolitan and communitarian age, where whatever happens in Uganda is not only Uganda's business, it is also the international business and the United Nations. And that's why I was even wondering, how do you then chase away an institution that you're part of, like UN Human Rights? You see? So I think international sanctions are important to support local civil society and people locally. Yeah, because these things spoils the name of the world.
Yeah.
Because I thought the world in 1945 in San Francisco, the world said no to torture, no to human rights abuses, and let us build durable peace, durable societies based on respect for human rights and equal economic development.
And with that, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me in this conversation. It's quite sobering when you hear, the different lenses of what needs to be done. Today in Uganda, the United Nations Human Rights Commission has no mandate here, and its offices are closed. But also today in Uganda, there are a lot of civil society organizations that are not functioning, and most of them that deal with human rights issues
And governance.
and governance. Today in Uganda, if you went to the Uganda Human Rights Commission, most probably you won't get the answers you're looking for. And so you as a citizen, I would dare say that you are on your own. And so you need to be civically conscious and aware of your human rights, but then also how to advocate for yourself. So I charge you, as my remedy to the situation we find ourselves in, to continue agitating, to continue advocating, but also to continue litigating for our human rights, but also for the return of the rule of law within Uganda. So continue building critical mass as we go into the next few years, or into the next week, or even into the next month, as we fight for our human rights as a collective. We can't do it alone. It will take me and you. But thank you for joining us this Saturday. I hope you have a good weekend. God bless.
Oh.